Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this chain tennis bracelet. Actually, in reality it's a bangle because there's no clasp, so we just put it on over our hand. And even though it ends up firm and secure, it's also got some flexibility to it, so it's also very comfortable to wear. And because of all the different kinds and colours of chain you can get today, you can really make this look however you want to, and of course also combine it with whatever beads you want to. Now if you want to support me in any way so I can continue making these free tutorials for you, you can always like, share and subscribe, and there's also a super thanks button below the video. You can also visit my shop where I sell jewelry kits and tutorials. But otherwise, if you want to learn how to make one of these bracelets, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now I'm using a regular round copper wire and the gauge is a 0.4 mil. And I'm just matching the colour of it with my chain. And then of course we do need our chain as well. So the specific type I'm using is a cable chain. And it has this lovely rose gold coppery tone, hence why I'm using the copper wire. And we'll of course also need the beads that we want to add to the bracelet. Now this doesn't at all have to be a specific type or even size, you can play around with both. I've just chosen to use these clear AB bicones. They're going to add a lovely sparkle to the piece, and matching with the chain they're going to also end up being really elegant, I think. But of course it's also a great way to add some colour. Now we'll also just need a couple of tools, so of course we need some flush cutters so we can cut both our chain and our wire. And then I'm just going to have my tweezers and nose pliers handy just in case I need to use them. Now the tool and material list will, like usual, be in the description box down below, along with useful links. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is get our chain ready, and that means cutting the amount of lengths that we want to use for our bracelet. So we obviously also need certain lengths. Now what I've found is that 35 centimeters per length works pretty well. And that's obviously going to end up basically being a full bangle around your wrist, so it's not going to have a clasp on it. So I'm going to be using 8 lengths of about 35 centimeters each. You can of course use more or less lengths of wire. If you use more, that will make the bracelet wider, or if you use less, that will make it slimmer. Now you probably know that working with chain can be a little bit fiddly, especially if you're using multiple lengths of it. So a little tip that I found is to make it easier is to say get a scrap piece of wire, for instance, and then use that, feed it through a link in the chain. In this case I'm just doing it on the end just to show you. And then you can feed multiple lengths on as well. You can do this both while you're cutting but also while working with it. And that way you kind of keep hold of your lengths of chain a little bit better. And you have these links that we attach to the wire always sitting in that certain spot, and you can always refer back to that. And obviously the rest is still kind of doing its own thing, but you always have that point where they're attached. So that's just a little tip of making it a little bit easier to work with if you need that. Now what we're also going to need is a length of our wire here. So what I have is 2 meters. Now that does sound like a lot, but we're actually going to double it over and kind of work with 1 meter on either side at a time, so that makes it a little bit more manageable. So we basically need to pick up one end of all our chains here, and like I showed you, I just attached them to a scrap piece of wire just to try and have a little bit of control. And then what we need to do is start from this end, grab the wire that we cut ready, and basically start weaving through the links here. What we just need to make sure to do is that we're always weaving so the links are in the same direction, which means as I'm starting out here, of course this is going to be the most fiddly because everything is loose, but that's why it helps having that scrap piece of wire on the end. Now we need to weave this through the second links first of all, so not the very first ones on the end, but the second ones in. You can always hold them a bit taut like this, makes it a little bit easier. So the first thing I like to do is make sure that all the links here are actually first of all facing in the same direction. That makes it easier just to feed the wire through. And then once they are, keep hold of it. And like I said, in the second link from the end, I'm going to take the end of my wire and start feeding it through. And make sure you grab onto every single link. So you go through each of the 8 lengths of chain and just double check that. And I'm through all of them, so then I'm going to start pulling my length of wire through to the point where we want more or less the midpoint of our wire starting at the end of our chain here. So I'm just kind of getting to that point, and then I put the ends together so we can find the actual midpoint, and then just pull it to where that is. And this is then the starting point of weaving our chains together. So obviously throughout just take your time, because like I said, the chains do kind of have a mind of their own. So they want to just do whatever they want to do, but just try and keep hold of them the best you can. So from here, I'm going to just take one end of the wire at a time And we then need to weave through the next link in each of the chains. So that's technically now the third one. And again, I like to just kind of straighten all the links out first of all. So make sure they're all facing the same direction, because like I said, that makes it much easier to just feed the wire through. And obviously because it's chained, sometimes it can also just be handy letting it hang down, and then it'll kind of form more naturally. But I've got the links in place. Let's see if I can hold it so you can see it. So we're going through the third link from the end of the chain. And again, make sure you catch onto each one of the links. So each one of the lengths of chain, just double check. You can also count and go on through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then just pull that through gently. Now here as well, make sure we don't get any kinks. So if you see one forming, just undo it before we keep pulling. And then just pull it all the way. I like to hold my fingers on the chains while I'm pulling the wire tight. So that is now going through the third link there, which then also means grabbing the other length of wire. So that's just the one on the other side. That's still only through the first links that we went through. We also need to bring this through the same row of links that we just went through, but from the other side in the opposite direction. So basically the wires are going to meet in the middle and come out on opposite sides again. Now because we already have that one wire through from the other side, that should make it easier to get this one through. Again, do just double check that you've gone through all of the links, and then gently start to pull that through. And then just make sure that before you pull it all the way, I like to just hold on to the other length there and pull against the chain itself. So I'm making sure that's tight, and then I pull the other one here tight that we just brought through, because we want to avoid the wire kind of pulling out on the ends in any way. And then we can already start to see the effect that we're going to get. So each row of the links in the chain are just going to be lined up pretty much just perfectly next to each other there and slot into each other. And that's basically what we're going to keep doing. So what's just important to pay attention to is, like I said, the direction of the links. So because now we've done 2 rows, we want to make sure the next row that we do is the same as not the one we just did, but the one prior to that. So that means I'm just going to line up my links so they are sitting correctly before I bring my wire through. And once they are, you can just take the end of your wire. It doesn't matter what side you start with, but then just start to feed it through the next row of links. Double checking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, I've got all of them. And then gently pull that through. Again, I like to hold my fingers on the area that we're working with. Just undo any kinks, just so that I know that everything stays in place. So that one's pulled tight. And now getting the other side through the same row of links should be easier, because we already kind of made a path for it with the first wire that we brought through. So just feed that all the way until it comes out on the other side and we can grab it. And then pull through until it's almost all the way through. And that's where I just like to make sure that the first wire we brought through is nice and tight. I hold against it, and then I pull this new one tight. And then basically that's what there is to weaving the chain together. You just want to keep going like this. Like I said, the next row we just need to make sure is that the links are facing the same direction as not the one we just went through, but the one prior to that. So we get a nice and even look all the way through. So this is how far I've gotten now, and this is basically going to be one side of the bracelet, because we now reach the point that's going to be the midsection where we're going to add beads in. Now there's no set length that this has to be. Of course it depends on the size you're making yours, but also it does not do precisely going to the middle of the back. I'll just show you with one I've already done. If I just hold it up against where the beads start, what you just need to do basically is make a part of one side of the bracelet. Like I said, it doesn't have to be directly in the middle there on the back, because we're going to be attaching the ends together anyway, and it should be pretty seamless, if not impossible to see where they are. So like I said, we've now reached the point where we need to start adding in beads. So we also then need to get rid of some of these lengths. Now what I'm going to make sure to do is keep some on either side. And again, this will also depend on how you're making yours. So you want to keep a minimum of 2 lengths on each of the sides here. So at least those 2, and let me just get the ones down here, these 2. Now what you then have left is the space between them, and that's where you're going to add the beads. So you can either choose to remove the remaining lengths and just have 2 left on either side, or you can choose to remove just the 2 middle lengths, for instance, so you have a smaller gap, but you then have 3 lengths of chain left on either side. It all depends on the look that you want, and also the beads themselves. So if you want to use smaller beads, you might just want to remove the 2 middle lengths, but if you want to use larger beads, you might want to remove an extra length on either side to make the gap in the middle bigger. So that's really what it comes down to, and also obviously depends if you're using more lengths in the first place. But that's the basic principle of it. So I'm going to start removing my chains now. I'm just going to start from the very middle, just to try and make sure that I don't remove the wrong chain. So I'm going to cut these 2 off, and I'm just going to cut them off right where the very next link is loose, so we haven't gone through. Those are the lengths that I'm going to cut off. So that's 1 length removed, and then the same with the other middle one. Cut that one off as well, and then just remove the little bits. We can also get rid of that, and if we just have a look, you can see we now have a gap in the middle. So for my design here, I'm also going to remove the next 2, working outwards towards the sides. So I'm only going to be left with 2 lengths of chain on either side, and that's just to accommodate for the beads that I'm using, so they kind of slot in nicely. So same principle, cut off the very next loose chain that we haven't brought any wire through yet, like that. And get rid of it, and just get rid of that little bit of chain that's left as well. And then just the final one, again just making sure that I'm grabbing the right length, just separate them out to double check, and then cut that off and remove it. Now you don't want to be getting rid of these lengths because we're going to bring them back and use them again. But for now, to create this gap for the beads, this is where we're at. So the next step is to then continue weaving our wires through the chain, and then along the way in that gap that we made, add our beads in as well. But we're now going to keep each wire on their own side, except for when we add in a bead. So I'm just going to work with one at a time, and doesn't matter what side you start with. Now what I just want to do is move my way a little bit up the chain so there's space to add a bead in. So in other words, I don't want to add a bead in the very next chain link there, because it's going to conflict with the last couple of links in the ones we cut off. So to create a little bit more spacing, I'm going to weave my way a couple of links up. So again, same principle, weave through the links and make sure the links are facing in the same direction as the previous ones that we went through. So we'll keep the same look going. Now pull that through gently, and I'm just pulling through those 2 lengths of chain and basically coming out in the gap between the 2 sides, and then pull that nice and tight. So that's the first link after we cut off the other lengths, going through the other direction again, and I'm just working with these 2 lengths of chain for now. And it's a little bit easier now because we're only working with 2 lengths of chain instead of all of the length from the very beginning, so there's a little bit less to pay attention to. Hold on to that. So we get the wire nice and tight. I'm going to go back through, because what we need is for the wire here to end up facing in towards the middle, so into that gap, which means I'm just going to go through the next lengths on this side and pull that through. Again, just holding on to everything so it stays how I want it to. And then we have this wire ready and in position to basically add in our first bead. Now we just need to get the other one cut up to that point as well. So just same principle. We need to weave our way through. Just having a look. They are facing the wrong way, so I just need to reposition them like that, and then bring the wire through those 2 links and towards the middle. Hold on to that while we're pulling it tight, and then come back the other direction and they are facing the right way. So we'll bring that through, gently pull the wire all the way through, and then the final few links to go through before we end up in the same place as the other side. Just double checking they are facing the wrong way as well, so just sorting them out first to then be able to easily go through, just like that, and pull the wire through to get it in the same position as the other side. So there we go. Now we have the two wires basically facing each other, and you can then imagine we're adding a bead. The two wires are going to cross inside of the bead. So just grab a bead, add it onto one length at a time, let it drop down here, and then I'm just grabbing the other length of wire and going through the same bead in the opposite direction. And now you can pull that all the way through first, but what I like to do is then go through the links on the opposite side there, which are the same links that we came through with the wire that we just finished with, to come all the way out to the outer edge. And again, just holding everything in place while I'm doing this and making sure I avoid any kinks. And then pull that tighter down. That's where the bead is going to sit. But we just need to get the other wire through those links on the opposite side as well. So just go through the last links with a wire through, and then carefully bring that through. And just make sure to undo whatever kink might form there. And then bring it through till it's all the way tight. And then we can pull on our wires, and we've now added in our first bead just perfectly in that gap there. And that is basically the principle of continuing to add in beads. We need to move our wires up to the next place we need to add our next bead. Now of course that's not going to be in the very next few links there, because that's going to clash with this bead. That's not going to be enough space. So same principle, we need to go through a few more links. So I'm going to go through in towards the middle, back out towards the side, and back in towards the middle. So basically 3 movements, and then that's going to be in position. Same with the other side. Go in towards the middle, back out to the side, in towards the middle, and that's going to be the next point where I'm going to add in the next bead. So exactly the same principle as the one that we just added. And you really do this for however long you want your beaded section to be as well. So there's no set sizing on that. It's completely your choice. So now I made the beaded section the length I wanted to have. You can of course make this however long you want it, and even make it take up more space all the way around your wrist. That's completely up to you. But then we reach the point where I'm going to go back to using chain. So basically repeat the very first part here that we did, so we can also end up connecting it and it becoming nice and seamless. So what I'm going to do is, when we started the beaded section up here, if you remember, we cut off the chain. So what we're going to do now is just basically reattach it in the opposite way, you could say. So instead of cutting it off, I'm going to add it. So just choose one of your wires, it doesn't matter which one. I already have them in position here, so both wires are coming through those last lengths that I've gone back and forth from that last bead a couple of times. And they're in position where I need to add my lengths of chain. And they're going through the ones on the outer edges first of all. So this wire is going through those 2 lengths of chain. So what I'm going to do is just grab the lengths that I cut off earlier, just before we started that beaded section. And I'm just going to take one at a time, and on the very last link there, it doesn't matter what end, I'm going to put my wire through. So that's 1, and then that's 2, 3, and the final one, and that's 4. So then just let them drop all the way down, almost kind of like we did with the beads, but obviously these are just the lengths of chain instead. Just gonna sort them out. So just double check, we have 4 lengths on here. Of course it might be different if you're using different amounts. So I'm just going to let them fall all the way down to sit next to those 2 chains that are already on the wire. And then we can take the same length of wire and then just bring it through the 2 final chains. So the ones that are on the opposite side where the other wire is already going through. So basically just finish off this side first and just pull it through nice and gently. Like that. And then you can already see how this is going to work. So basically we're just attaching the chains back in the center there. Now the other length of wire is already going through those first 2 chains that we just went through with the other wire. So we first of all just need to bring it through the 4 chains in the middle that we just reattached. and make sure to grab all of them, those very first links, and then also through, of course, the 2 chains on the opposite side. So we're crossing all the way through just like we did in the beginning, making sure we don't miss any of them, and then just pull that through, making sure to avoid any kinks here. And then we can just pull on the wires here, nice and tight, and we have all our links of chain reattached together again. And from here, all we gotta do is pick back up what we were doing at the very beginning, so this whole section without beads. So again, just starting on one side at a time, we need to just make sure that all the links are laying in the right direction. So just look at the previous rows. I can see I just need to rearrange them a bit. So like previously, I kind of just like to do that first. Get the links into position because that'll make it easier just to feed the wire through. So something like that. And then take one wire at a time, go from one end, make sure to pick up every single link all the way to that final one, and then pull the wire through gently. Make sure it's sitting properly. Put your fingers on there and then pull the rest of it through. And then we've already gone through those links once, so it should be easier going through with the other length of wire from the other side here. So feed that through all the same links, and again just pull that through. And like previously, I like to just grab hold of the wire we already brought through and kind of tug at that. So make sure that's nice and tight while I'm then pulling the second one all the way through. And we then basically pick back up exactly what we were doing at the very beginning before we added beads in. So what you want to do now is just keep going like this until you have the remaining length you want to make up your full bracelet. So I've now reached the full length here that I need mine to be. Now of course, if you're just making this for yourself, what you can do is just measure this as you go and then stop when you reach the right point. And what you just want to make sure to do is, because this is going to be a bangle, so that means we'll have to be able to get it over our whole hand, you need to make sure you measure on the widest part of your hands. So when you would kind of crumble up your hand to put a bangle on and measure the widest part, then that is when you would stop. So that will be the length that you need, because then obviously it would also fit on your wrist. So obviously you can just measure this as you go, or you could also measure prior. So measure the length that you would need, and then whether it's using a piece of cord or a measuring tape, and then you could flatten it out and just measure against it as you go. But regardless, just make sure that you measure the widest part of your hand. And then from here, we basically need to finish it off. And that also then means connect it together. So what we need to do is, I'm just going to remove the wire from the very beginning first. If you still have that on there, just get rid of that. And when we've done that, we then have those single loose loops on this end. So we have one loose loop on either chain. And on this end, we have these long lengths. So we need to shorten these down because I don't need the rest of these. Just get the lengths of wire out of the way. We still need to use those. Now to get rid of the excess, I'm going to cut off the lengths here, but we need to make sure we leave a loose loop on the end, just like we have on the other end. So we don't want to cut off the loops right up against the last ones where the wire went through. We need to make sure we cut off basically on the second loop after where the wires went through. So like I said, we end up with a loose loop kind of dangling there at the end. So just cut that. You can just do, I would recommend one at a time, just to make sure we don't cut off anything wrong. And that's the first one, and then cut through the second loop, that one. And I'm just going to work my way all the way across, just one length at a time, like I said, to make sure I don't cut off anything wrong. Cut that, get rid of the little bits as well. And the last one, and we can just get rid of all these little bits and the remaining of the chain. So now we have a loose loop on either length of chain on both ends here. So what we need to do now is actually connect these together, and we're going to use those loose loops to do that. So this part I would say can be the most fiddly about the whole thing, because again we're going to use the wires, but you just want to kind of try and get in the best position that you can. So make sure all of the loose loops are kind of pointing downwards, and also that they're coming out on the ends, all of them, so we don't end up skipping any or anything. We want to make sure we catch on to all of those loose loops on both ends. Now what I just want to do is have a look at both ends and see how we can line them up the best, because obviously we want to make it as seamless as possible. And basically what we want to end up doing is intertwining all of these. So if you imagine each finger is a link and these are the two ends, we want to end up intertwining them in between each other like this. And then if obviously imagine the loops like the chain links, we'll put the wire through all of them from both ends, which then interlocks them into place. So that is the trickiest part, just because obviously it's still chain that we're working with and it still just kind of wants to do its own thing. But just start from one side and from one end. You want to first of all grab the outer link on that one, and then I'm going to go to the opposite end of the bracelet and grab the outer link of that. And like I said, it can be pretty fiddly because we then need to go back to the first side here, grab the outer link of that, go back to the other one, and then grab the next link. So as you can see, we're alternating from side to side, grabbing one link, and by doing that, intertwining them with each other, and just keep grabbing the very next link that's available, working your way across to the opposite side. And there you can see I almost just missed one. It was hiding kind of on the back, so just try and make sure to not miss any of the links. So now I've got the length of wire all the way through there, and we can just pull it just to make sure it doesn't come back out and we have to redo it, because it is a little bit tricky getting through all the links, making sure they get intertwined properly. But then we can just pull this length tight, and then of course we just have to get the other length of wire through all the same links in the same way. But it should be easier now because we already have that one wire through. So just kind of feed that through from the one side back out to the other side, and then just grab onto the very end, and there we go. And then we can also pull that tight, and then you can see we basically connected the two ends together. And it's also really nice and seamless, because we more or less just made it look like this continues just all the way, and it's only interrupted by where we added in the beads. But then what we just got to do is more or less just finish this off. Now if you can, then ideally it would be nice to get the wires just through another row or two of the links here. It's going to be a little bit tight, so maybe you won't be able to at all, but if you can get it through, then try and do that. Otherwise you can just finish off the ends here if you literally can't get the wires through. But like that, coming out the other side, because it just gives it a little bit more security. And I'm just going to do the same with the other one if I can. And it can very much be beneficial to use pliers as well to feed the wire, basically, because you can get a much better grip and you can kind of guide it better than you can with your fingers. You can also put more force into help pushing it through. So like I said, just feed it through another row or so if you can. Obviously that will depend on your chain as well and the size of your links. But then from here I'm just going to finish them off. So to do that I'm going to take my cutters and just cut off the excess, leaving a short little tail, roughly like that. Just enough so I can grab onto that with my pliers and bend it inwards and basically tuck it into the end of the next row. So kind of as if we were going to go through the next row with our wire, we're just doing it just with the end of it, just to make sure it's tucked away and not on the outside, of course, so it's going to catch or scratch on either skin or clothes. And just push it as far in as it'll go. Make sure you can't feel it with your fingers. Same with the other side. Cut off the excess, just leaving a little tail, bring it around and then back through the end of the next row to tuck it away, and just make sure to push it in as far as it'll go. And there we're basically finished off the ends and connected everything, and the bracelet is finished and ready to wear. And you literally can just put it on, because it's a bangle, over your hand and have that as a nice, and in this case pretty elegant bracelet as well. And it's nice and easy just to quickly put on and off. So as you can see, the one I ended up making here is pretty elegant looking, but you can really make them look in many different ways, both by using different kinds and colors of chain, but also different kinds, colors and sizes of beads. So there's really loads of options here. Now don't forget to check out the matching ring that I have a tutorial for already. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.